Dhamma greetings to everyone joining us today for the Dhamma Center's first ever series that we would be starting for the first time on Buddhism and sustainability. We have with us today a very accomplished man in the area of sustainability in the world. Don De Silva. Don De Silva is a former senior official of the United Nations Environment Program and has also worked for the Institute of Environment and Development and implemented effective global media campaigns to create awareness about sustainability. Don is also a trustee of the Dhamma Center, and he has worked tirelessly in bridging Buddhism and sustainability and bringing out those facts to the world. So Don, thank you very much for being with us today and accepting our invitation.
Thank you very much, Bhante, for giving me this space.
Wonderful.
Were you going to say something?
Yes, so without further ado, Don, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Bhante. Indeed, your Buddhism and Sustainability series is not only the first for the center, but I don't think I've seen any such series anywhere undertaken by a Buddhist center. So that is extremely important. So now I'm going to be sharing my screen. Let me first do that. Sharing my screen, bringing my keynote up. Can everybody see the screen? And how is the sound like?
Yes, Don, it is clear. We can see the screen.
It's okay. Brilliant. So, just want to minimize this a little bit. Excuse me. Sorry. Got everything in order now. Wonderful. Thank you very much for all who are joining here, near and far. This is about and this is the first of the series on Buddhism and sustainability. As Bhante was saying, I am a Buddhist chaplain and a university mentor, and I have been involved with diplomacy and the environment for over many years. But this particular presentation is going to be on the following items. First, a short introduction as to what Buddhism and sustainability is all about, setting the world context, the authenticity of early Buddhist texts, what did the Buddha mean by fake speech and misinformation, the context of speech in Buddhism, our obligations as Buddhists to counter fake speech, the use of fake speech during the time of the Buddha amongst the rulers, spiritual leaders, the political element at that time, and the various processes that were used by the Buddha to counter fake speech, which is extremely relevant for what is going on at the world today. So a tiny further little bit of my background. This is where I lived for a very long period of time. Unlike other United Nations agencies, the United Nations Environment Program moved to Nairobi, to Kenya, to become the world's first ever UN agency. This was in 1974, to be headquartered in a developing country. So we moved the power structure from New York and Geneva, where the UN agencies are more or less residing. And I was there right at the beginning, involved in, and this was my home. And then these are the various watering holes that I used to be involved with. And of course, this is my mentor and guru on the environmental side, Maurice Strong, the person who globalized the World Environment Movement. He was the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment, the first executive director of the UN Environment Program, and a UN Undersecretary General. Now, you must have been listening quite a bit to this term sustainability. Now, this is something a bit new, because when we started to come up with phrases like sustainability and so on, these phrases were not very popular at that time. So let's take a minute or two to find out what sustainability is. So I think the best definition of sustainability comes out of the World Commission on Environment and Development, which was established by the UN Environment Program, chaired and led by Gro Harlem Brundtland, the Prime Minister of Norway. And the definition that they came up with is sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. I'm going to go through that slowly again. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So normally, when you talk about sustainability, environment, climate, the tendency is to focus on wildlife or picking up litter or about climate change and so on. Sustainability or sustainable development is much more, because it concerns the use or the misuse of our natural resources upon which our livelihood depends. And this includes food and consumption, poverty, the gap between the rich and the poor, homelessness, racism, the use of utilities like gas, water, electricity, flooding, health, well-being, and so on. In other words, it is all about sustainable living. So Buddhism and the environment, therefore, as you can gather from what has been going on before, are really two sides of the same coin. If I may be bold enough to encapsulate Buddhism in two words, I would say it is sustainable living. But before we go into fake speech, I would like to just deal with one extremely important concern that I have, and that is about fake Buddha quotes that I see going around all over the place. There was this tweet some time ago that was made, and this is taken from the fakebuddhaquotes.com, which went like this: when words are both true and kind, they change our world. And this was attributed to the Buddha. And this then got replicated, distributed right across as a statement by the Buddha. But in reality, the Buddha really doesn't need fake Buddhist quotes because the 17,505 discourses or so, both large, long, middle, and small, have adequate information and relevance for other quotations not to be concocted. But the real quote, as you can see from the citation towards the right or the left, as you see it from my screen, goes like this: the friend who is all take, the friend of empty words, the friend full of flattery, and the reckless friend, these are not friends but enemies. The wise understand this and keep them at a distance as they would a dangerous path. So important that when you see fake speech in the form of fake Buddhist quotes, check them out. See if they have been mentioned in the suttas. And then anyone who is spreading this information, just ask them if they could provide a source for what has been said. Now getting on to what is happening in the world at the moment and the impact of fake speech. Fake speech throughout our history is nothing really new. It was utilized at length by rulers and spiritual leaders from some time. For instance, during the 1st century BC, Octavian ran a campaign of misinformation against Mark Antony, portraying him as a drunkard, a womanizer, and a puppet of Cleopatra. Then during the 2nd and the 3rd centuries, false rumors were spread about Christians, claiming that they engaged in ritual incest and cannibalism and so on. And in the 3rd century AD, the Christian writer Lactantius invented stories about pagans engaging in acts of immorality and cruelty. So in our human history, fake speech has been utilized, but not as intense in the way it is being used now, particularly within the social media. And social media has had a dramatic impact on the way we interact with one another. Stories and exposures move about with unprecedented speed, giving us information and misinformation about both important and mundane issues. So false news is false information or misleading information presented as news, and it is often aimed at damaging the reputations of a person or an entity or making money through advertising revenue. This is the new thing that is coming up, fake news advertisements. I wonder if you have seen some of these. But recent examples, for instance, spread through the social media side. The COVID-19 pandemic is a cover for a plan to implant trackable microchips within vaccines. Another one, recently, a couple of days ago, which was spread around, that magnets can stick to your arm in the place where you had the COVID-19 jab. So having had the COVID-19 jab, for the fun of it, I went and got one of my fridge magnets to see if it would work, but regrettably didn't work. Fake news is extremely relevant on matters concerning climate change and environmental issues. And in the 80s in particular, late 70s and 80s, the concern that was raised about scientists who highlighted climate change at that time was quite profound. And those who raised these issues were taken to task by those who denied climate change, even more virulent than what is happening now. Scientists, in particular, who put their head above the parapet to talk about climate change, in particular, had a very difficult time sometimes with their careers and so on. But at the same time, a very recent paper written in the Embryo Journal of the Royal Academy of Sciences talks about how fake news about climate change and biodiversity loss is having a worrying impact in the battle to halt growing environmental threats in the planet today. And this is something, the result of a paper written by a group of scientists. They say that social media reports have created a toxic environment where it is now very difficult to distinguish facts from fiction. One of the biggest challenges now facing our humanity is our inability to tell facts from fiction. This is undermining democracies, which in turn is limiting our ability to make long-term decisions needed to save the planet. I think this is something which also President Obama has repeatedly talked about. He said during a press conference in Germany some time ago, if we are not serious about facts and what's true and what's not, we can't discriminate between serious arguments and propaganda, then we have problems. Obama said, we live in an age with so much active misinformation that it is packaged very well and looks the same whether it's on. In an interview in The Atlantic about his book, The Promised Land, President Obama said, I think it's the biggest threat to our democracy. This, in fact, was echoed by President Biden some time ago, and even by the Secretary for State, US Secretary for State Hillary Clinton. Moving on now to the authenticity of early Buddhist texts. How does this fare? Now, there is a lot that has been written about the early Buddhist texts, which are basically divided into three baskets, three sections. The basket of discourses containing the Buddha's teachings. They are our primary source for finding out about how the Buddha and the Sangha propounded the Dhamma and the way they interacted with the Sangha as well as with the communities. Then you have the basket of monastic law, and then the basket of systematic treaties, the Abhidhamma, and so on. I dwell in the basket of discourses. This is where I find things, as far as I'm concerned, extremely interesting and relevant. So this presentation is based on the Buddha's teachings. The early Buddhist texts also refer to the authentic, verified records of what the Buddha said and did, and they can be traced to the historical Buddha. And so the recent research concerns a paper that has been written by Bhikkhu Sujato and Bhikkhu Brahmali, published by the Oxford Center for Buddhist Studies. And do take time to download this paper. Please study and read it, because I think it's a very interesting document. The paper, for instance, provides a very down-to-earth portrayal of the Buddha. The Buddha lays down rules, then modifies and even corrects them, as in the Code of Conduct 72, 74, and so on. In the midwinter, the Buddha sleeps on a pile of leaves in a track. The Buddha is called various names such as shaveling, menial, dark, and so on. A Brahmin verbally abuses the Buddha. The monk Badali refuses the Buddha's face to keep the Code of Conduct rule about not eating after midday. The Buddha complains of having a bad back and then lies down in the middle of a Dhamma talk. So you can download this document, do download it, and go through it, because I think it's really interesting. Speaking of fake speech, what is also interesting to note was the fact that there was a toxic environment in the days of early Buddhism. During the time of the Buddha, in India, the political landscape was under rapid change, as monarchies led by ambitious kings rose to embark on ferocious military campaigns for the purposes of expanding their domains. And within the courts of royalty, personal rivalries among those hungry for power were bitter. Spiritual communities of the time were not immune to conflict, and religious leaders, also proud of their traditions, sparred with each other in passionate debates, each seeking to defeat their rivals and swell their ranks. So the young Buddha, or the young Siddhartha Gautama, observed this in one of his discourses at the time, and he shared as follows: fear has risen from one who has taken up violence. Behold the people engaged in strife. I will tell you of my sense of urgency, how I was stirred by a sense of urgency. Having seen people trembling like fish in a brook with little water, when I saw them hostile to one another, fear came upon me. The world was insubstantial all around. All the directions were in turmoil. Desiring an abode for myself, I did not see any place unoccupied. So let's move into the Buddhist framework for right speech. It's not for nothing that the Buddha highlighted the importance of right speech. So I'm giving you here, it is really impossible within the given time frame to go into everything that he talked about concerning right speech. I have taken out some extractions from the various discourses, but there is a rich literature about right speech in the suttas. So what is right speech? And in Connected Discourses, he talks about, and what mendicants is right speech? Abstinence from false speech, abstinence from divisive speech, abstinence from harsh speech, abstinence from idle chatter. This is called right speech. And then in another discourse, he talks about with safeguarding as the foundation originate the taking up of rods and weapons, quarrels, contentions and disputes, accusations, divisive and false speech, and many other bad, unwholesome things. These are the 9 things rooted in craving. So the Buddha brings the cause as being rooted in craving. And also, as you know, just as much as I do, or even better than I do, in the 5 precepts, abstaining from false speech is an obligation. In the Noble Eightfold Path, also, right speech features. I'm using the general translation, right understanding, right thought, and so on. But of course, Samma is got a much more wider meaning than just simply right, as it has been translated down the ages. Samma really is wholesome, it's holistic. And what is clearly important is that right speech, as it is with each of the 8 factors, is interrelated and interconnected. And this is where the majesty and the impact of the Noble Eightfold Path is about, because it is an interconnected process. You can't simply just take something out, like the way the mindful industry is operating in some situations, and make it something separate. Then you do get into difficulties. So the Buddha pointed out that ignorance is the forerunner upon unwholesome states. For one of wrong speech, wrong action springs up. Then going into the fact that true knowledge is the forerunner of the entry upon wholesome states. For one of right speech, right action springs up. So it is an interconnected, holistic process. It is simply not effective if you take these things separately from one. Getting on to also the present context, I'd like to just highlight the killer words. And in my chaplaincy work, I come across, when I particularly deal with young people, I made a list of killer words that they often talk about, because these killer words are often used within friends, family, in the workplace, and so on. Words particularly which tend to stifle and dampen initiatives, or particularly suggestions, concerns, dreams, aims that people express. And the ways in which sometimes when aspirations are expressed by particularly young people, the responses are, there is no other way. You will never change. There is nothing we can do. Why can't you see it? Everybody knows. I don't have the time. You don't have a choice. And one which is often used in enterprises, don't reinvent the wheel when you are making a proposal. So In this context, the Buddha's advice to his son Rahula is quite pertinent. When talking about right speech, he said to his son, whenever you want to perform a verbal act, would it lead to affliction, the affliction of others, or to both? Whilst you're performing this, would it lead to self-affliction, the affliction of others, or to both? Having performed a verbal act, you should reflect upon it. If on reflection, you know that it led to self-affliction, to the affliction of others, or to both, it was an unskillful verbal act with painful consequences, painful results, then you should confess it. So reflect on your speech before, during, and after speaking. But of course, fake speech at the time of the Buddha was not only something which concerned the situation within families, but also rulers and aristocracy. And this is a very interesting discourse that I would like to present to you, which concerns the situation between religious traditions at the time. And this was about a general called Siha, who was a follower and a major funder of a spiritual group. And the general expressed a wish to see the Buddha. The general went to see his spiritual leader, Nigantha Nathaputta. And you can Google this name because you can find out more about the background of this spiritual leader, who raised many concerns about the Buddha, and particularly the fact that the Buddha advocated non-doing. So the general went to see the Buddha, and the general told the Buddha, I have heard this going about, Bhante. The ascetic Gautama is a proponent of non-doing, who teaches his Dhamma for the sake of non-doing and thereby guides his disciples. Do those who speak state what has been said by the Blessed One and not misrepresent him with what is contrary to the fact? Do they explain in accordance with the Dhamma so that they would not incur any reasonable criticism or ground for censure? For we do not want to misrepresent the Blessed One. So this is a very interesting example of how you counter fake speech. Because the Buddha then took that particular accusation, and then he also tagged in other accusations which he was accused of, and then he responded like this. He took the accusations, for instance, if you go into the accusation that the Buddha was a proponent of deeds, who teaches his Dhamma for the sake of deeds and thereby guides his disciples. For I assert bodily, verbal, and mental conduct. I assert the doing of numerous kinds of wholesome deeds. In this way, that one could rightly say of me, the ascetic Gautama is a proponent of deeds who teaches his Dhamma for the sake of deeds and thereby guides his disciples. Another one was about the fact that the Buddha was an annihilationist, and also that the Buddha was a repeller who teaches his Dhamma for the sake of repulsion and thereby guides his disciples. And the Buddha goes on to point out, for I am repelled by bodily, verbal, and mental misconduct. I'm repelled by the acquisition of numerous kinds of bad, unwholesome qualities. In this way, one could rightly say of me, the ascetic Gautama is a repeller who teaches his Dhamma for the sake of repulsion and thereby guides his principles. So this is a very interesting process of how you absorb the criticism and turn it around. Of course, this has to be done within reason in terms of what was said. Then, of course, he goes on to talk also in the sutta about the accusation that he is an abolitionist, that he is a tormentor, and so on. Time does not allow me to go through each and every one of this, but I wanted to demonstrate to you a very interesting process of how you refute fake speech and fake allegations. I think the critical and the most important thing is that about this particular episode, General Sia was a very powerful figure at the time. And here was a general who was checking facts from a spiritual leader. And the Buddha's response was a masterclass in how to diffuse a volatile situation, which directly responding and making matters, instead of just making matters worse, he chose a tactful and diplomatic approach. So then, following this response to General Siha, the general then responded by saying, "Excellent, Bhante, excellent. Let the Buddha accept me as a lay follower who from today has gone forth for his life." But the Buddha responded like this: "Make an investigation, Siha. It is good for such well-known people like yourself to make an investigation." And then the general responded, "Bhante, I am even more satisfied and pleased with the Blessed One for telling me, make an investigation, Siha. It is good for such well-known people like yourself to make an investigation. For if members of other sects were to gain me as their disciple, they would carry a banner all over Vesali announcing, 'Siha the general has become our disciple.'" And this, again, is a very profound interaction for the world of interfaith today. So the Buddha then urged the general to continue his support for the spiritual tradition. "Siha, your family has been a fountain of support for the Niganthas. Hence, you should consider continuing to give alms to them when they approach you." Following this encounter, the general invited the Buddha and his followers for a meal the following day. And then, when departing for home, the general asked his assistant to find meat and other food for her for a meal. And then the Niganthas spread fake speech rumors around that the general was going to kill, slay, plump animals to prepare for a feast to provide for the Buddha and his followers. There was a rumor that reached him, and so when the rumor reached him, the general responded, "For a long time, these venerable ones have wanted to discredit the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. They will never stop misrepresenting the Blessed One with what is true, baseless, and false, and contrary to fact, and we would never intentionally deprive a living being of life for the sake of our life." We move on to royal intrigues, another very interesting incident. The Buddha was living at Rajagaha when Prince Abhay was approached by Nigantanathaputta. And then Nigantanathaputta told the prince, refute the recluse Gautama's doctrine, and a good report of you will be spread to this effect. So these were the intrigues that were going on, not that very different from what is going on at this moment around the world between and in between faith communities. So the prince, to his credit, went straight to the Buddha and checked the story with him. Venerable Sir, would the Tathagata utter speech that would be unwelcome and disagreeable to others? And the Buddha said, there is no one-sided answer to that, Prince. And as a result, the response made Prince Abhay think. Prince Abhay then reported the matter to the Buddha and the entire conversation with Nigantanathaputta. The Buddha responded, and such speech as the Tathagata knows to be untrue, incorrect, and unbeneficial, as which is also unwelcome and disagreeable to others, such speech the Tathagata does not utter. So the discussion, I'm going to just move on to the other slides now because of the time frame. I would like to go on to the section about being well-spoken. The Buddha often urged his monks to be well-spoken. He speaks only Dhamma, not non-Dhamma. He speaks only what is pleasant, not what is unpleasant. He speaks only what is true, not lies. When speech possesses these four factors, it is well-spoken, not badly spoken, and it is blameless and irreproachable among the wise. Holding debates. Holding debates, meeting halls at deer parks was an important factor in the time of the Buddha. Debates and discussions were very much part of our culture, and rulers used to set aside parks and open spaces for wandering ascetics to dwell and discuss their views. In some places, there were debating halls and so on. But the Buddha tried hard to avoid fruitless debates, and in some cases, he walked away, which were conducted for the purposes of humiliating others and promoting one's own fame. But as monks wandered about towns, they would invariably be drawn into debates and discussions with Brahmins, philosophers, ascetics of opposing views, and so on. So he took a lot of time to train the Sangha to provide advice for those intent on holding discussions and participating in debates. He said, those who speak with quarrelsome intent, settled in their opinions, swollen with pride, ignoble, having assailed virtues, look for openings to attack one another. They mutually delight when their opponent speaks badly and makes mistakes in his bewilderment and defeat. But noble ones don't engage in such talk. If a wise person wants to talk, having known the time is right, without quarrelsomeness or pride, the sagely person should utter the speech that the noble ones practice, which is connected with the Dhamma and meaning. Not being insolent or aggressive, with a mind not elated. He speaks free from envy on the basis of knowledge. He should approve what is well expressed and should not attack what is badly stated. He should train not in fault finding, nor seize on other mistakes. He should not overwhelm and crush his opponent, nor speak mendacious words. Truly, a discussion among the good is for the sake of knowledge and confidence. Such is the way the noble discuss things. This is the discussion of the noble ones. Having understood this, the wise person should not swell up, but should discuss things. This is another really interesting sutta that I came across about the Venerable Nun Dhammadinna. The Buddha, in several of the suttas, highlighted particularly people who were foremost in various areas of life. And in this particular sutta, he highlights Dhammadinna as being the foremost in speaking the Dhamma. So the Buddha says, the Buddha and the monks and the nuns were staying at Rajagaha. Then Visakha, who was the former husband of Dhammadinna the nun, went and met her and sat down and engaged in a conversation with her. I suppose this was the former husband maybe trying to test the nun Dhammadinna about her grasp of the Dhamma. And after a very long question and answer session, which you will find in the sutta, please read this, because this is extremely interesting. The nun Visakha the nun Dhammadinna told Visakha to also check things out, to go to the Buddha and ask him about the meaning of these things. So Visakha, the lay follower, bowed down to Dhammadinna and, keeping her on his right, went to the Blessed One in reverence. And he reported the conversation that he had with the Venerable Dhammadinna. And the Buddha responded, "The nun Dhammadinna is astute. Visakha, she has great wisdom. I have given you both the Pali and the English translations of this, because this is a very important one. Actually, the English translation, which has come down the ages, is that the word Pandita has been translated as astute, but Pandita, as most of us know, is a scholar. A Pandita Panditas are scholars. And so he says, if you came to me and asked this question, I would answer it in exactly the same way as the nun Dhammadinna, ensuring equality of prowess. This is what it means, and that's how you should remember it. I'm rather surprised that suttas like this don't get talked about too much in our discussions. Targeting speech is another area that the Buddha highlighted, which is really quite important. 5 areas concerning 5 types of persons dealing with when you're speaking. Because he said a talk on faith is wrongly answered to one devoid of faith. A talk on virtuous behavior is wrongly answered to an immoral person A talk on learning is wrongly addressed to one of little learning. A talk on generosity is wrongly addressed to a miser. A talk on wisdom is wrongly addressed to an unwise person. So the Buddha urged his disciples to be conscious about targeting what is being said. This is something I think, as far as this sutta, which would be of relevance to all the experts of human resources in various organizations across the world, which is that of how measures you take to reprove others. And this concerns a discourse by Venerable Sariputta, who addressed the bhikkhus about reproving others. And this may be even amongst our entourage or our families and friends. This particular thing is very important. I will speak at a proper time, not at an improper time. I will speak truthfully, not falsely. I will speak gently, not harshly. I will speak in a beneficial way, not in a harmful way. I will speak with a mind of loving kindness, not while harboring hatred. A bhikkhu who wishes to reprove another should establish these 5 things in himself before he goes and does it to another person. I wonder how much time and effort in funds and time would this particular advice would have been saved if this was practiced by human resources specialists. We then go to debates. So the Buddha was at times prone to leave discussions, but the Buddha at times also directly engaged and addressed some of the issues very directly. And this concerns a discourse between Satchika, the son of Nigantanataputta, and the Buddha. So the son of Nigantanataputta, Satchika, vowed to his followers that he would defeat the Buddha in a debate. And so the vow went like this: so in a debate, I will shake the recluse Gautama down and shake him up and thump him about. These are found in the middle-length discourses. And so he went to the Buddha, sat down, and then his opening proposition was: material form is self, feeling is myself, perception is myself, formation is myself, consciousness is myself. This is a bit similar to René Descartes, who came up with this famous phrase, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. And the Buddha was patient, and he then responded with one couple of really interesting queries. But in answering this, Satchika says in his proposition, after having completed his proposition, he says, so does this great multitude that was present there. This is a little bit like politicians who say, many people are now following this particular policy or supporting this policy. But when asked how many, is when many people statements get stumped. So the Buddha immediately responded by saying, what has this great multitude got to do with you, Ajivasana, who which is the other name for Satchaka. Please confine yourself to your own assessment alone. Look at the rebuttal. And then the Buddha went on to follow it up by saying, would a head anointed, authentic, noble king, for example, exercise the power in his own realm to execute those who should be executed? Satchaka answered in the affirmative. Then the Buddha asked, what do you think, Ajivasana, when you say thus, material form is myself? Do you exercise any such power over that material form as to say, let my form be thus, let my form not be thus? Particularly alluding to the fact that a king would have the right to do away with those whom he may have thought committed a crime. When this was said, Satchaka, the Niganta's son, fell silent. And he responded by saying, it is wonderful, Master Gautama. It is marvelous how when Master Gautama is spoken to offensively again and again, assailed by discourteous courses of speech, the color of his skin brightens and the color of his face clears, as it is to be expected of one who is accomplished and fully enlightened. So, to conclude, the critical element is that social media carries advantages and disadvantages. The impact of fake speech has imploded, particularly with the development of social media. Fake speech is a threat to daily living, well-being, governance, and democracy. Spiritual communities need to pay urgent attention to these problems. But it is important that we really pay attention to the teachings of the Buddha, particularly about fake speech and right speech, because he has provided us with a way in how to counter fake speech that is relevant for what is going on in the world today. Thank you so much for listening. I hand it over to you now, Bhante.
Thank you, Don. So if anyone has any questions that they would like to ask, you are free to unmute yourself or to signal to us that you have a question, and you can ask your question from Don. To just get it started, Don, now as with sustainability and sort of managing fake speech that we have spoken about through the session that you have sort of explained through the sutras, when it comes to a solution to fake speech, would you say that the Kalama Sutta would be a proper solution which was offered by the Buddha in this regard?
Yes, definitely. The Kalama Sutta is particularly critically important because it urges individuals to find out what is going on.
Yes. And how do we find that line between, for example, with social media, the amount of fake news that often sort of circulates, and sort of media-based manipulation which happens through social media? What would you sort of suggest being, through a Buddhistic perspective, of being a practical approach to this problem?
I think in my case, I can speak to you from my own little experience, because I tend to move through various WhatsApp groups and so on, and I get very concerned about some of the things that are distributed, for instance, about either climate change or about COVID-19 or about one group or another. And the critical thing which is important is, as was highlighted by the Buddha and by Venerable Sariputta and others is the need to engage in a constructive way by asking questions. Is this information correct? Right? Is this information verified or not? And then play our part instead of simply just keeping very quiet. The critical thing with the Buddha, whether it is with fake speech or with other issues, is that they engaged. They did not simply just run away and ponder or meditate on the side. They engaged. And so I think, as far as I'm concerned, as a person in the Dhamma, it enables us to engage constructively.
When you say that, I am reminded of this conversation that I had with a good Dhamma friend who is also actually here, is with sort of spiritual institutions, often the things that often happen, the devotees and the practitioners and the followers often do not question. Even if it is wrong, we do not question, maybe, from this sort of perspective of culture. But when we look at it from the Buddha's perspective, the Buddha is always someone who questioned. And that sort of brings out or sort of maintains a standard for stability, for purity, for all the maintenance of good in that society and spiritual ground, isn't it, Don?
Yes,
please.
That is extremely important, Bhante. What you have highlighted is really important, because the Buddha didn't say, come and believe.
Yeah. If only he did.
Yes. He didn't say, come and believe. He said, come and see.
Yes.
Find out for yourself. So this is something where I have some difficulty within some of our tradition, because there is a need to be able to raise issues of genuine concern, never ever to do it in a way that is negative, but raise issues of genuine concern, and also raise issues without fear or favor. Because this is quite important. This is part and parcel of the way the Buddha and the disciples operated. When there was an issue, and I have not had the time to go into detail, but if you look at how, for instance, say in the Vinaya, the rules were formed or proclamations were done during the time of the Buddha among the Sangha, it was sort of put forth, the important ones were put forth 3 times. And these were accepted by the community in silence. Somewhat similar to to my mind, the reading of the parliamentary bills, because the parliamentary bills in the UK Parliament get sent to the House of Lords 3 times for approval. So there was in the Buddha's Sangha the element of openness, transparency that were there. And the encouragement, and also the interesting thing with the Buddha is that he created the space for people to ask questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, people were not scared to ask questions, as you saw in the suttas, the few suttas that I have highlighted. Various people came and asked him all kinds of questions.
Absolutely.
So he created the space. People were not scared of him, and he was not scared of responding.
And most of the Sutta Pitaka is actually the result of questioning.
Indeed.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm just holding ground up until someone would like to sort of, if anyone has any questions or points of views that they would like to share, and sort of share and sort of discuss, you're most welcome to unmute your mics and sort of voice your opinions or questions to the forum.
Please don't feel shy.
I think on the grounds of, the perspectives that we have sort of put the topic out, it is quite new in a way to the topics of discussion with regard to sort of sustainability, fake speech. We don't really talk about these things in light of sort of Buddhism to that extent.
May I ask you a question then, Bhante, on that particular statement? Why is it the suttas are a rich reservoir of experiential knowledge relevant for what is going on in the world today? Mm-hmm. Why aren't these particular suttas not often talked about in Dhamma, Desana, teachings, and so on?
Are you asking me why don't?
Yes.
Like organize this talk, didn't I? Well, I think with regards to the points of focus that people often have, they sort of take or look at the sutras with a certain perspective of mindfulness and all of that, which they then assume that does not sort of befall this area of concern. But when, earlier today, when I was thinking about this talk and about sustainability, I remembered in the Vinaya Pitaka how much care the Buddha puts in to taking care of the Sangha, the community of Buddhist monks, as well as the devotees. A good example, Don, is, when the devotees have attained enlightenment, and because it is said that they have this sort of, unshakable faith in the Sangha, and when the monks go on alms round, they are so caring that they would give all the food that they have. And there is a rule in the Vinaya Pitaka, in the monastic code, where we are only supposed to take 2 spoons maximum, and we have to sort of stop them from serving more. And if we see a monk walking towards a house, we must tell the monk not to go to that house, in order to protect the devotee. And we've had this conversation before with regard to sustainability, and it's so beautiful about the different areas that the Buddha has taught, and not only about the sustainability of the Buddhist monks and the community of the Sangha, but also to everyone who is involved in the process. And I think we need to sort of speak more upon these factors, upon these areas, to really sort of grasp the full extent of the human values expressed by the Buddha.
Absolutely. And this is quite important. I have not gone into this, but I will go into it in the future, because this is critically important in the fact that the Buddha taught, as far as the Dhamma is concerned, the fact that conditions and phenomena are interconnected and interdependent. This is the majesty of the Dhamma.
Yeah.
The very fact that sustainable consumption, sustainable lifestyles, education, and so on are all interconnected. How we live in a place, the kinds of things we use to construct buildings and so on. Now I see someone has raised the hand. That's really good. I'm looking forward to this.
Lakshmi, please unmute your mic and ask you.
Yeah, I don't know whether this is relevant to the topic Mr. Don De Silva discussed today. I think there's something going on, giving false interpretations to Pali words. So, because some monks or some devotees have different interpretations to Pali words, giving, So it's a lot of confusion going on in certain words. So I wonder whether Mr. Don has experienced that. And so that's like distorting the Dhamma. Whether you have come across this.
Yes, you have touched upon a pet topic of mine. I will also, I hope that Bhante will also respond. First of all, I think the critically important that, of course, all blessings to those in the past who translated the canon into English, without which some of us would not have access to. So I think it's important that we credit all those who have been engaged in this. But over the years, since its translations, there have been discrepancies. So it is critically important for those who are in authority and those who are Pali scholars and so on to ensure that the true teachings of the Dhamma in the meaning of the words are really properly brought out. I fully agree with that particular statement. But what is critically important is then to be able to be alert to what is being said. I tend to regrettably always ask questions. I'm not a Pali scholar.
Yes, sir, we do ask questions, but as being lay people, our knowledge is also limited. So we cannot argue more than up to a certain point. So such statements just keep us silent. So, but we know in our hearts that is wrong.
Yes, at the same time, it is also possible. Well, of course, if you go into a discussion rather than an argument, it would be then a discussion to clarify something. If the person on the other side, the other party, is not willing to be engaged or to enter into a discussion, then there is really not much of a point in continuing the process, because the critical thing is not necessarily to accept what is being said, but rather to find out what is true and realize it, what is within, and then move on.
Yes, yeah. So scholars, I mean, people like you who are very important. Yes. If you take an initiative to give the correct translations, I think it will be very beneficial to lay people like us, because in our hearts we know that is not right, but we don't have enough sufficient knowledge to say that it is not right. So we are in quite of a dilemma in that way.
On the whole, ma'am, I tend to go a little bit on the basis of trust in many ways, because I tend to give credence to some extent to both translations. And now there is a very interesting website which you might be interested in checking out, which is the suttacentral.net.
Okay.
Set up by Ajahn Sujato, which is really quite fantastic. I referred to this earlier because this contains not only the canon, but also it contains now some of the translations of the Chinese agamas. And now with suttas, you can compare. You have this really rich situation online where you can compare the different translations of the different traditions.
That's very useful.
Yeah, and then you can make it, and then a person can make up one's mind. I find that really useful.
Thank you very much, and Teruvan Saranai, Bhante, and Dr. Don De Silva.
Thank you, Lakshmi.
What do you think, Bhante, of that important question?
Well, I mean, I think the trouble that Lakshmi was explaining is far too familiar, because it happens, I don't know, in if I am to listen to 10 sermons, it's there in almost 7 to 8 sermons, where there is sort of a distorted meaning which is given to, or an interpretation which is given to the Pali doctrine. I think we all have, because as adults, as people pursuing Dhamma, we all have the responsibility to filter and sort of take what is right and to be able to sort of put off what is wrong. Practical for me with personal experience, what I would always go through is I do my research, you know. So if something doesn't sound right, I do check up personally. And I think for people who, if they do want to really get into the true essence of what the Dhamma is, they have to do their research on their own and see what fits in accordance with the teachings of the Buddha.
One day, when we have some base to refer, then it will be very much easier to go on. Yes.
As Don said, I mean, we live in a time with ample amounts of resources now. I mean, these resources were not available 10 years ago. And I think we are quite lucky to have all these resources coming out. I mean, every sutra is a Google search away, really, with the commentaries and all of it. And I think that is a very, very good thing, but we must make sure that we do use these things. Specifically in Sri Lanka, something that I have seen and something that I've spoken with my friends back in Sri Lanka, with the amount of Buddhist channels being established in Sri Lanka. I mean, I think we have, 7 or so Buddhist channels now established in Sri Lanka. The value of the teacher is not specifically put on what the teacher says anymore, but rather on how popular the teacher has become.
Yes, true.
Which I find that is a real scary thing for the future of Buddhism. Because people now tend to follow and respect people with following rather than people with substance. Don, what do you think about that, Don?
Yes, I think so. That's critically important. And may I also respond to this very important question?
Yes, please.
In my own experience, for instance, there are now very interesting translations of Buddhism, of the suttas, that are available, which you can have at your fingertips. In your iPad, you can have the entire Nikayas, which you can get through Kindle. And I carry this off and on wherever I go from time to time. So that's one. But of course, with Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations, you have to pay in order to purchase those. But Ajahn Sujato has also done comprehensive translations of the canon, and those translations are available free of charge in the suttacentral.net. Please contact us later on if you want to get the places where you can find these publications. But if you do Google it, you will be able to find it. But please get in touch with me. And I'll be quite happy to send you the linkages to where you can find them. And you can download these, and you can then research. The entire Pali English dictionary is in the University of Chicago website that you can have at your fingertips. So it's a different situation today in the world.
Yes. As Bhante mentioned Sri Lankan Buddhists, I would like to say another thing that goes against all these true and Kalama Sutra even is that certain people have, our Sri Lankan Sinhalese, mostly Sinhalese people have certain dittis which are unshakable. So, for instance, now when I advise somebody to follow the medical specifications to combat, to get sort of away from COVID, one very Buddhist, so-called Buddhist person said, no, we recite Ratana Sutra every day and that will take take care of ourselves. I said, it's very good to have confidence and to build up your confidence, but for medical reasons, you should follow the doctor's instructions. But that person went on saying, well, you're not a Buddhist if you don't believe in the Pirit. So, I said, not that I don't believe in Pirit, but you have to follow the medical practices. So, to that extent, so our people have dittis, what are called, which are unshakable, and so very easy to spread false things among our people. And I'm very sorry and sad to say that, being a Sri Lankan Sinhalese.
Don, do you want to take the bait or am I going to take it?
No, I think I'll pass that on to you, Bhante.
Well, thank you very much, Lakshmi. I think you made a very clear point. And I think it is very important to note that the foundation of every Buddhist practice is wisdom. Saying that, Don, before we close the session for today, I want to remind everyone that this is the first of many sessions to come, not specifically just with fake speech, but everything concerning sustainability and how Buddhism and Buddhist wisdom, the Buddha's teachings, gives us the necessary data, the information and guidance to lead a sustainable life. Don, before we close out the session, could you just enlighten us on the areas that, when we would say sustainability, what areas does this cover?
Of course, we could definitely, with sustainability, the first thing, moving on to subsequent presentations, would be to talk about the interconnectedness of phenomena, which the Buddha talked about, how interconnected we are. Then look into, and there are suttas upon suttas of where the Buddha talked about plants, animals, rivers, forests, speeches, and so on. And a large part of what he talked about was really also about nature therapy in many ways. It is really quite important to evaluate what he said and did. And there are some hilarious suttas also which I have read, that has set me into fits of laughter, particularly one where the Buddha compares an individual to thunderclouds and the way the clouds sound. Then you have, of course, which you raised earlier about consumption, sustainable consumption. Also about robes and how robes were preserved by the Sangha at the time and then now as well. Then there was the whole area of the empowerment of women, for instance, which took place during the time of the Buddha, having set up the first bhikkhuni order of his time. These are really quite important, but they're interconnected in the Paticcasamuppada and other different discourses highlighting the elemental linkages between a person's life and the elements around is quite critically important. And the Buddha also, of course, brought all of it down to values. in terms of one's own life. The inner environment as against the outer environment. So these are really precious collections of teachings the Buddha has on sustainability, which is vital and relevant, and it is critically important for the Buddhist Sangha to really understand these things.
Absolutely. Wonderful, Don. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all the time and effort that you had put into preparing for this talk and sort of producing the presentations to make the point clear, Don. Thank you so much. The series on Buddhism and sustainability will be having talks on Buddhism and sustainability together with Don and other speakers who would also be sort of joining us time to time every month. So to be updated on the future upcoming sessions that we would be having on Buddhism and sustainability, and of course the environment as well, do subscribe to the Dhamma Center via www.dhammasenter.uk to receive emails about future programs that we have planned. For Vesak, we do have a lineup of talks, and also we have a 13-hour retreat which is happening on the 26th of May from 8 a.m. to 9:15 p.m. All this, the data, the information about all these talks and activities can be found on the website. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for your time. And I would suggest with what Don has said regarding sustainability, regarding Buddhism, sustainability is something which goes into each and every aspect of Buddhist life, right? It goes into each and every aspect, goes down to even the plate of rice that you would eat at every single meal. So sustainability is not just a Western perception. It is, we might not use the specific word, but it is very much a part of the Buddhist living and Buddhist practice. Saying that again, Don, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining. Take care and have a lovely rest of the evening. Take care and Theravada Sannai.